Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. In keeping with tradition, I'm trying to bring you some of the most unique and innovative people in the HR space, even beyond HR. Today, we meet with Christy Brown. Hello, Christy.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Fantastic.
For those of you who don't know Christy, Christy is an executive, founder, and entrepreneur. And in her latest job, in her latest passion, she is now the CEO and founder of a nonprofit focused on coaching female CEOs. She is the president of Launchpad. Can you tell us a little bit about Launchpad?
Yeah, so Launchpad 2X is actually a not-for-profit founded 9 years ago. I was initially part of their board and decided in a passion play for myself to couple along with my startup venture capital roles that I wanted to focus entirely on female founders. So we moved or transitioned this role for me back in June 2020. And our focus is solely providing education, resources, funding, and operational sources for female CEOs who are scaling to what we call a $20 million mindset. Mm-hmm. So those are companies that have early revenue, that are showing promise, and we create a learning environment around them once a year, and we accept 25 female CEOs into the program.
That's outstanding. And it gives them a great place to be able to leverage your ideas and your support and get the resources and understanding so you can help them actually reach that $20 million mindset or the $20 million goal, correct?
Correct. We provide education around financial literacy, for example, confidence, working with teams, establishing boards, creating correct term sheets if you're raising venture capital. Right. So we're really giving them a foundation of stepping into the role of CEO versus founder.
And we'll provide links in the description in the podcast. So if people want to learn more, they can go there. One fun thing that if you did not know Christy, you should about her, she's competitive. She has been in 4 Ironman triathlons. And that's really tough. I don't know if I could survive one. You've been in 4 of them.
I have. Yes. I have a competitive and athletic nature. I've done 4 Ironman triathlons. I've paced that out over many years. I've competed in hundreds of them, and I still am an avid cyclist, runner, and yogi in my own mind. And I am still very avid about health and wellness and mindset, especially considering the environment we had in 2020.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that no matter what age a listener is, that if you've been wanting to get out and try, whether it's running or cycling or anything like that, it's never too late to start. I started running when I was 50. And I've run 2 5Ks. I have to do more. Yes, I have to do more. But I wish I would have done it earlier in my lifetime. So today, Christy, the topic that we're going to talk about is the use of analytics in building out the next big idea. And so we'll talk about how companies who are trying to come out into the marketplace or how to launch and their use of analytics in getting there.
Hey, it's Bob Pulver, host to You Podcast. Human-centric AI, AI-driven transformation, hiring for skills and potential, dynamic workforce ecosystems, responsible innovation. These are some of the themes my expert guests and I chat about, and we certainly geek out on the details. Nothing too technical. I hope you check it out.
So, Christy, question number one. How have you seen people using analytics to be able to build out their ideas to take to the marketplace? How are they building it into what they're doing and their ideas?
Yeah, great question. So if I'm looking purely at the startup environment, obviously there is a series of kind of test and learn that you take along the way. And what I mean by that is you're constantly questioning who your customer is to determine product market fit. And there's no other way to achieve that than through analytics and data. How many customers do you talk to? How many would share or convey that they would utilize this product? If they would use it, would they pay for it? And then I, really see companies bump that against, well, they say they'll pay for it, but are they telling the truth or lying because they like me as a person, right? So we use a lot of data in and around that. The startup culture now is heavily reliant on data. There's a lot of white labeled solutions in addition to pure solutions off the shelf that help you design data. Some of the tools that I use that I don't mind, mentioning are Airtable, Asana, Basecamp, platforms like that you can actually create more than just a spreadsheet. So that you can reverse back and really look at anything from venture capital deal flow, which lives in my world, to how your founders are performing, and you're giving them a grading scale that you can sift through later. So again, those are very entry level, immature ways that startups are utilizing data, but there's obviously, as you can imagine, a vast array of that, from marketing to growth hacking to later stage companies that are really using data in a vital way to provide communication. For example, politics aside, our last election was 100% reliant on data and reporting and what the polls were doing. And that is all very data driven.
Sure. So let me ask you a question. When someone's trying to figure out how they're going to grow their business, do they start with any type of analytics around how they grow, meaning whether it's using gig workers or using full-time employees, and what's the smartest path to getting to the right level of people in order to be able to get to the kind of scale they need to?
Yes. If I'm understanding the question, and I'm going to answer that a couple different ways. Tech-driven intelligence and data analytics plays a magnificent part in the HR hiring process. So when you're talking about startups, there's very little runway to make big financial mistakes. Well, I would say that applies to any company, any organization that makes a bad hiring decision regrets that to the tune of, I think the estimate is over $20,000 per resource that you lose. And that's without recruiting fees. And that is, something that I think businesses are looking to, again, mature and improve. And using data analytics prior to hiring and how they'll impact the employee hiring process through the journey inside the organization is critical. And that data can be led through, anything through talent acquisition systems or learning management systems, all the tools, David, that you and I are accustomed to seeing in a talent, 360-degree talent environment. All of those things are going to lead to, how do I get the best high-performing employee? And then I'll answer the gig worker conversation. Gig workers are, not new. We've been seeing part-time or on the dime, on the fly workers for many, many years. Uber, the Uber model and the Amazon model have certainly popularized that, but of course they're using data. Their systems were designed with data intention. So every time a employee is required for a particular job, the gig worker can hop on to an Uber application and say, I'm available to drive. And immediately that data is converted over. How many hours is that person driving per week, for example? How many pickups did they make in Atlanta, Georgia, for example, where I live? How many were made outside of Atlanta, Georgia? And then, so on and so forth. And you can really start populating who that employee is, what they look like, the hours that they work and are available, and all sorts of data that you can feed in and out of that. Even further, as a consumer of data, I also know that my data is being used to also apply the same methodology. And, these systems can learn in and around. For example, if I'm an employee, it's very easy to determine if I have a car or not. How many Uber rides am I taking at 8 a.m. every day to arrive at an office?
Right.
So it's very easy to really apply data in a very logical way to create some, employee information, both on the front and the back side of that. So I hope that helps.
It does. I was also thinking about the world of workforce planning and being able to achieve results and trying to figure out, and I'm sure there's an equation there somewhere of, do I use Fiverr to be able to find someone to fill in a particular role? Do I use some other, I forget the name of the company that ADP acquired that does gig work as well, where you can apply as a gig worker or as a company looking to hire gig workers. I'll fill in the blank shortly. But Workbench, right, exactly, which I'm a part of, which that's the reason why I can't believe I don't remember it. But, to try and understand, how do I fulfill on a particular need at a particular time? And obviously what's been made popular because of these platforms is an ability to not have to pay a W-2 for that work for that specific time, but to acquire the skills when necessary for short periods of time and not waste capital, trying to hire someone, waste the time, waste the energy and the money when you only need it for short periods of time.
Yeah. And, I would also add to that, and that's an interesting comment, again, we can kind of use the cliche term gig worker, but there's also a return to work. So for example, in the past 10 months, what we've seen is a very large percentage. In fact, the number was over 100% of women accounted for all job losses in the U.S. in December 2020. Important to note. Why is that? So how can we use data to really analyze what that means? Is it due to caregiving responsibilities? Is it due to they can no longer do both and they've got to make a choice to work part-time? And there are companies out there now that really promote women returning to work, women and men, they've added, returning to work for particular skills that have been in the home for, more than 2 or 3 years raising children. Yeah. So there's a lot of different companies out doing different things to really grow what a gig worker looks like. And I feel that term is changing into, I'm a gig worker now, give me financial literacy. Because they've got these hourly earnings that you referred to, and they aren't required to have W-2s in certain states, right? So California actually legislated on that and was pretty strict about, you have to define a gig worker as an employee. And so there's been a lot of, legislation and creation around what that really means. To keep it stupid simple, it is the male or female really coming back from 2 or 3 years, 10 years, 15 years, re-entering the workforce that's looking for that hourly role to just get into re-entry in a lot of ways. And our data really defines so much around that, around skill set, ability, cognitive recognition. I mean, there's all sorts of workforce management tools and assessments and behavioral insights that we can gain in and around those employees before even hiring them.
And I think that the pandemic has caused so much structural insecurity that there will be a need, especially in most of 2021, for the wrapping the arms around those people who felt the effect of pandemic and had to make the decisions that you were talking about before, and be able to get them back on their feet and back in. And it might be, and I'm sorry for using the word gig worker too much, but it might be gig work that does get them back in, at least short term, while their kids are still at home, or at least home partially because of the hybrid schooling models, in order for them to re-enter the workforce in a more productive way. And I'm very hopeful that, or I'm hoping that the next set of statistics to get published for January and beyond, we'll start to show some turnaround in terms of those trends, because they're just awful trends.
Yeah, agree. And I think, if anything, 2020 shined a light on the segregation of populations in that manner in a lot of ways as well.
And we've also seen some of the populations that have been traditionally disenfranchised probably hurt even harder in terms of people of color and of course, females probably. And as you said, for December, an incredible statistic that showed 100% of the December job losses were female. Just crazy. It just shouldn't be. So hopefully that will turn around soon. And I think all of us have to keep our collective fingers crossed on that.
Yeah. But there's no crossing fingers aside. There's ways that we can modify and change that. It has to be a directive of the organizations and, targets and taking a stand that this is, not acceptable overall, right?
Absolutely.
But we do have to look at both sides of the equation and understanding too that there was a statistic, I'm probably not going to quote it exactly right, but it was above 80% of women cite that the pandemic and the home care responsibility has fallen on them.
Right.
Versus, a traditional, whatever the significant other model may be, that it's falling on the female. So that's been tough. And you have to choose hard decisions in an environment like this. Is it, I do homework with my kid, or I'm stressed and the kid, is eating everything in sight and not doing their homework.
Right.
And, how do I make wise choices about what I'm supposed to be doing? And these are not natural approaches that we've seen in, many years. I mean, women just earned the right to vote and went to the workforce, 60 something years ago. So,
right. And I agree with you. I think that it definitely needs to be a proactive push to have people reach out to those people who have been affected and to get them back into the workforce. And I apologize. I did not mean cross our fingers and make, close our eyes and wish that it goes away. We actually have to do things to make it go away.
We do. Yeah. Great point. Yeah. And it's actually been 100 years since we earned the right. I said more than 60, but it's been about 100 years.
Thank you. So let's change the topic of conversation just a little bit. Let's talk about any ventures you may have seen where people are starting to use their entrepreneurial spirit to go into, whether it's people analytics or people data, to try and exploit what is being looked at as being kind of the next generation of really cool technologies and the really kind of cool place to be, which is looking at all the opportunities in data in the HR world and trying to make some money out of it.
So what's the question around that, David?
So it was and we talked about this before, have you seen ventures into people analytics or people data?
Tons.
Or is that not something you want to do? Okay.
Tons. I mean, it feels like everything we look at has people analytics and data, from, the sad, sorry things we see occurring in Facebook that they don't take accountability for, all the way over to, the way that we approach our work life, social media, and LinkedIn.
Right.
Those people analytics are critical. But if we're talking internal to the organization, it's really defining, so much more than that. Like you and I kind of repurposed in our conversation a few minutes ago, it's really creating, how are they learning? How much time are they learning? How much time are they spending learning? Are they spending time in one application versus the other? There are lots of things that the enterprise can review and control from a systems perspective for their employees to really gain insight as to not just what their performance, but their productivity is. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really interesting culture to be aware and on top of. And that's where we see a lot of future of work technologies focusing. Anything from hiring through diverse channels, mm-hmm. all the way up to, telling the employee how they're going to be paid through instant payrolls.
Right.
So there's a lot of different aspects of data, and think how relative that is. So if we have a large hourly worker population that is taking, heavy loans on payroll lending loans, which is such a predatory environment. Wouldn't we want to know that that's impacting their productivity? Because maybe we pay monthly instead of biweekly, and maybe that would make a change in their life. So there's a lot of kind of empathetic leadership, I think, that's tied into understanding the employee and the data that we're looking at. And companies are really, really looking at that. And then I would also add, Slack has opened up an entirely new collaborative world. And so now if we can actually, there's a startup that I worked with over the summer that has its first round of funding that's based out of UC Berkeley that has created this just unbelievable data-driven connection to Slack. So it can actually determine based on their algorithm if the employee is depressed or if they aren't being as productive or if they're on or off for a certain percentage of hours per day.
Sure.
And again, we can start seeing patterns and recognition and determining, are they stressed due to caregiving? Well, they must be, because during these hours of, 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., we start seeing patterns. And so it's, that data is going to really start driving some employee productivity in a different way.
Yeah, I think some of the problems that I've seen, especially around those types of ventures in the past, have been around the privacy issue. So people, there was a company called Qualtrics. I think they were acquired not too long ago. But what they used to do is network analysis based on emails. And they would read the emails, they'd read who the emails were going to, and they would do network analysis to say, well, the frequency of emails that go to the C-suite, or the frequency of emails that go to this level or to that level, and the amount of time that it takes you to respond to these emails shows whether it's performance or empathy or energy or engagement. And it reads those things and this model reads those things, and it gives insights about the person, and it gives insights about the hierarchy, and it gives insight into who are your up and comers, who are the people who will be leading the organization. And in the same way, you have the Slack-based analytics that you were talking about, which shows engagement and emotion. And there is some issue about the intrusiveness and the privacy of those things. And it's always been a concern. And it talks about the ethics about those things. Are you seeing that the ventures that are leading into these things are starting to push on some of the new cultural norms that we have about acceptance of that intrusiveness into our lives?
I don't know if it's acceptance. I mean, I think, look, we've been talking about cloud-based platforms for a very long time. And these collaboration platforms, rule our life.
Sure. Because
we've created these environments that we have to access things at a more rapid pace. So when we're talking about, data exfiltration, for example, workers are really eager to file share and get things done at a faster pace, and they become more productive. I mean, Slack has lots of statistics on that, but the privacy is an issue. And I think most, if I think about how, from a policy perspective, how are organizations addressing this through a policy? If you're utilizing their collaboration portals, it's just like us using email 20 years ago. We're signing off that we're okay, that email be read. And we're signing off that it's okay that, if there's, a type of insider threat that occurs, that we're okay that they read through our information.
Right.
So, what they can't do is move one data from one organization to the next, which is, important to kind of think about as well. So what happens when the employee leaves? How much of that data is, held in regard versus not? How much is relative? We see it happen where we forward an individual's email address to the new acting person, and, what happens. And then, you can start really kind of measuring, how much are employees accessing data they shouldn't be.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that's giving you a checkbox for a complete answer. I just, have experienced privacy and data is becoming more and more crucial, to the point of, how do we pick that data up and move it with us? How do we get control of our data? And I think, amazingly, and we've all seen the headlines, first off, SolarWinds was a massive problem.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
You don't have good security, and as a country, as a world, we're going to pay for it because
Absolutely.
we weren't aware of how important it was for SolarWinds, and they controlled and, monetized much of the data across some pretty important systems in the country.
Absolutely.
So, and the other pieces to that are Facebook. Apple's put pretty heavy, stringent security policies, allowing the user to make that decision for themselves. But if you're monetizing the data in a scenario like Facebook,
right,
you are not making that decision on your own. And Facebook makes lots of money doing that. I mean, I'm not a user, but I do like looking at the pretty pictures on Instagram,
right,
but I have to be careful what I look at because they'll serve up 10 more pictures that show me a Dalmatian puppy running in the snow. So you got to know where those things are going. And it's much like healthcare. You've got to get in charge of your own privacy and your own healthcare and make those decisions to take ownership of it. And I think as employees mature and data continues to be this, this HR tool that we're utilizing, when I exit an organization, I'd like to know where my data is.
Yeah.
And so I think HCM platforms are going to address that more commonly than not, meaning I'm an employee, I'm leaving company A. Right. If you're a provider of my HCM tools in company B, I'd like that block of data to be removed. And I think that's where we see new technologies like blockchain really getting integrated into, we can see that there was a record there, but we don't store it anymore. It's gone.
Yeah, and to the extent at which companies need to keep access to your data, there's only a legal limit, or there is a legal limit on what they can keep. And with GDPR, and especially part of a company that had to make sure that they were following all the GDPR recommendations, even though they were not a European company, but they had European clients, we made sure that the data was following all the GDPR rules. So there could have been employees who said, I'd like you to purge my data. And they would have had to have purged as much as was necessary in order for them to be compliant with GDPR. But in order for them to also be compliant with all of the US regulations, there were certain things they'd have to keep, especially if they were producing W-2s or if they had some audit necessity to keep access to that data. But I think that kind of speaks to some of the other things that we're caring about a lot more of these days, which is understanding where our data is kept, how it's being kept, and to your point, having some control or some say as to how it's being utilized.
Absolutely.
And I think as good consumers, whether it's as part of an HRIS or whether it's part of a payroll system or a recruiting system or whatnot, at some point there will be a reckoning to say that as a good consumer, I know where all these things are and I want to be able to have them purged, or at least have an understanding about what's there, like in the world of credit bureaus, and be able to have an audit of them to be able to purge what's not right or to be able to correct what's not right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think
Absolutely.
we found another possible entrepreneurial scenario there, Christy.
Yeah.
That's a good
always.
idea there.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Turetsky Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So let's transition to the third question. And this is one I know that you'll have fun with, which is, what's your advice to people who might be interested in launching their ideas? What advice would you give people about measurement and being able to keep an understanding about the analytics or how they're performing relative to how they were hoping to perform?
Yeah.
Where can they go to get that advice, and what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, there's so many tools. There's, I'm an avid sort of reader. I read constantly, as I'm sure most people do, to learn about where their strengths and weaknesses are. There is a book that I love called Measure What Matters.
Right.
It's really the definition of OKRs and, how they measure, for example, against KPIs. In a world like a Google, and they use Google pretty often because OKRs were really developed out of that environment, the whole organization is driving towards what those objectives and key results are. And I think that that's a really good starting point for a young startup, whether it's 1 employee or 3 employees or 10 employees,
Right.
as long as everyone understands the objective and what the results need to be to drive towards that, that is a crucial thing. And it's not always the same. It can change quarter by quarter, leading towards the same objective. As long as IT knows their function, HR knows their function, and the co-founder knows their function, you've all got different, kind of measuring results, but it's an important tool. And I recommend that startups utilize that pretty frequently to just give a base layer of how you should think about measuring.
Wouldn't you expect that from the start, good management or good development of an idea would have measurements built into the idea from the beginning of, this is the market, this is the percentage of the market we want to own, this is the time period where we're going to get there, and you can measure yourself along the way. Don't you think that's actually kind of built into the idea from the beginning, or shouldn't it be?
It should be, but it's also a differentiator in the founders. I mean, I oftentimes talk about there's a technical founder, there's a marketing founder, there's a finance founder. None of those skill sets match each other, and typically you don't get a founder that has a 360-degree skill set. Typically,
sure,
they exist, sure, but again, a good technical co-founder likely is going to be able to create some measurements, but they're probably going to measure those around the technology versus the milestones of user adoption or the milestone of lead generation through the marketing team. And in the marketing person the same way. I think I am a very good CEO, but I am a sales and marketing focused CEO with some metrics.
Right.
That being said, I typically rely on hiring very smart teams to help drive towards those goals that we have towards clients. But it does take that operational ear to rein me back in and say, hey, we've got to create some good operational synthesis around what your marketing and sales objectives are. And I think just kind of knowing your strengths help with that. And you're not going to have an all-in-one CEO typically. And that's many times why you see so many co-founders on a team doing it together. One goes with the other, right?
Right. Complementary skills.
Absolutely.
So, Christy, we've talked about being able to understand how new companies build their ideas, and especially their ideas around analytics. We've talked about the purpose and usefulness of people analytics and people data. And we've also talked about your advice about how people can start up and launch their ideas and how they might be able to get some complementary skill sets from other people to try and help build out their ideas. Anything else you want to end with or summarize?
Yeah, it's a good question. I often think of what, the core tenets we've created in Launchpad. I mean, those that are really seeking to launch, scale, or exit their company, it's all applicable. Just act and avoid second guessing yourself. You're always the CEO. You're always going to be the CEO. So you've got to be accountable like the CEO. Know your company's value. Know it. And know the investability and the defensibility of it to an investor and use that to your strength. And then play to win. We're all out here trying to create great ideas. And, I wish I had a stat on how great ideas are born and how often, per second, we're probably thinking of an idea. But expect yourself to win and get out there and get it done. And then make sure you surround yourself, of course, with the people that can help you grow, as I mentioned before, selecting the right people that are stronger than you. And then, certainly exude confidence in what you're doing so that you can continuously grow as a founder. And then find tools around you. I didn't mention it before, but accelerators and incubators are a great spot for early founders to really, really cherish, grow, and scale their ideas and surround themselves with the resources to do it. And that's what we do at Launchpad 2X.
That's great advice. Thank you very much, Christy.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you back soon. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we appreciate you joining the HR Data Labs podcast. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section. If you like the podcast, please hit subscribe. And if you have a friend who might be interested in the subject matter we talked about, please forward it to them. Thank you very much, and please stay safe.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.